Windows 11 is a polished turd. You can update it, debloat it, disable Cortana, strip out the ads, turn off the telemetry, and spend an entire Saturday making it behave like an operating system instead of a billboard. And at the end of all of that, it is still a turd, just shinier. This is why millions of people are searching for the exit right now, and most of them find Linux, get confused, get frustrated, and crawl back to Windows within a week. Not because Linux is hard, because every piece of migration advice they found was written by someone who forgot what it felt like to be afraid of a terminal. That ends here. This is the Linux migration guide for Windows refugees. Why Windows refugees fail. Here is what nobody says out loud about switching to Linux. You are not failing because you're bad at computers. You are failing because you are afraid, and that fear is completely rational. Windows has trained you for decades. Start menu bottom left, taskbar along the bottom, right-click for options, files, and folders you recognize, everything exactly where Microsoft decided it should be 20 years ago. It never really moved. Then you install Linux and the desktop looks wrong. The menus are in different places. The file manager works differently. The way you install software is completely different. Nothing is where your muscle memory expects it to be. That disorientation is not a Linux problem. It is a retraining problem, and it goes away faster than you think, but only if you pick the right distro for where you are right now, not where the Linux community thinks you should be. Expert aside, the reason Linux feels alien to Windows users has nothing to do with complexity. Windows and Linux made completely different design decisions at the desktop level decades ago. Neither is objectively correct, they're just different. Your brain built a Windows map. Linux requires a new map. That's it. The new map takes about 2 weeks to feel natural. What actually breaks? Let me tell you what the migration videos never tell you. 3 things actually break when Windows users install Linux, not philosophically, literally. First, Wi-Fi drivers. This is the one that sends people back to Windows on day 1. Windows installs drivers silently in the background without you ever knowing it happened. Linux does not always do this. The specific problem is Broadcom Wi-Fi chips, the BCM43 series that ships in millions of laptops. These chips have notoriously poor Linux support and may require manual driver installation after setup. If you don't know this before you install, you will have an operating system with no internet connection and no obvious way to fix it. Before you install anything, search your exact laptop model plus the word Linux on the Hardware Compatibility Wiki at linux-hardware.org. 5 minutes of research prevents a weekend of frustration. If your laptop uses an AMD processor, Wi-Fi almost always works out of the box. Intel Wi-Fi chips are generally fine in 2026. Broadcom is the specific chip family to check first. Second, software replacement. Microsoft Office does not run on Linux natively. Adobe Creative Suite does not run on Linux natively. For most people, LibreOffice handles document work well enough. But if your workflow depends on advanced Excel features, complex Word formatting, or professional Photoshop work, Linux will require workflow changes that take real time to adjust to. Know this before you switch, not after. Third, gaming, specifically competitive multiplayer. Steam on Linux has become genuinely excellent. Proton 9.0, released in early 2026, now supports over 90% of the top 1,000 Steam games at Platinum or Gold ratings. For single-player and most multiplayer titles, Linux gaming is a real option in 2026. The exception is kernel-level anti-cheat. Games like Valorant and certain Call of Duty titles use anti-cheat systems that run at the kernel level and specifically block Linux. Before you switch, go to protondb.com, log in with your Steam account, and it will show you the compatibility rating for every game in your library. Do this before you commit. Some games will not work regardless of which distro you choose, and you deserve to know that up front. One honest caveat for NVIDIA GPU users specifically. DirectX 12 games on Linux with NVIDIA hardware run roughly 20 to 30% slower than on Windows. Vulkan games and older DirectX titles are fine, sometimes faster than Windows. But if your library is heavy on the latest DirectX 12 titles, that performance gap is real, and you should factor it in. The Linux community problem. Here is the uncomfortable truth about getting Linux help online. The Linux community treats Windows refugees like they are beneath them. You ask a beginner question on a forum, and the responses fall into two categories. Category 1, someone tells you to use Arch, by the way, as if that is helpful advice for someone who just wants their printer to work. Category 2, someone pastes a terminal command with no explanation and acts like that solves it. Neither of these people is malicious. They have just been using Linux for so long that they genuinely cannot remember what it felt like to not know any of this. Their map is so deeply built that beginner confusion feels foreign to them. This is why most migration guides fail Windows refugees. They are made by people who are already comfortable. They skip the fear. They skip the muscle memory problem. They bury the driver warnings in the comments 3 days after someone already rage quit back to Windows. The honest advice? Do not ask the Linux community what distro to use. They will tell you what they use. Here is the honest breakdown. Not what the community uses, what actually works for someone coming from Windows right now. Linux Mint is the answer for most people, and the Linux community will never admit it because it is not exciting enough. Mint is built on Ubuntu, which means it has access to the largest software repository and the largest community support network in the Linux world. It uses the Cinnamon desktop environment, which puts the taskbar at the bottom, the start menu in the bottom left corner, and the system tray in the bottom right corner. If you closed your eyes and described a Windows desktop to someone and asked them to build a Linux version, they would build Linux Mint. It ships with multimedia codecs pre-installed. Hardware support is excellent on most modern machines. Updates are conservative, your system will not break itself overnight. For most Windows refugees, Linux Mint removes every barrier except the 2 weeks of retraining, and those 2 weeks are unavoidable no matter which distro you pick. Ubuntu is the second answer. It is what powers Mint underneath, and it is what most professional Linux support assumes you are running. The GNOME desktop is different from Windows in ways that take adjustment, but it is clean, modern, and the most documented Linux distribution on the planet. If you want the largest ecosystem of solved problems and answered questions, Ubuntu is that distro. Pop! OS for NVIDIA GPU users. Pop! OS ships a dedicated NVIDIA ISO that installs the correct proprietary driver for your card automatically. No terminal, no manual driver hunting. If you have an NVIDIA GPU and want to avoid the driver frustration that has sent thousands of people back to Windows, download the NVIDIA version of the Pop! OS installer and that problem disappears on day one. If gaming on NVIDIA is your primary use case, also look at Bozite. It's a newer distro built specifically for gaming with a console-like experience. Steam and Proton are pre-configured, NVIDIA drivers are handled automatically, and it is designed to feel like a gaming appliance rather than a traditional desktop. For Windows gamers who want to switch, Bozite is worth knowing about. Fedora for developers who want to go deep. Fedora runs the newest software, the newest kernel, and is what most professional Linux developers end up on. If your goal is to eventually be fully at home in the Linux world, Fedora is where you end up anyway. It requires slightly more patience with Mint, but rewards it. Everything else? Arch, Gentoo, NixOS, these are mastery choices, not migration choices. They exist for people who want to understand Linux at the architecture level. Come back to them in 6 months when the new map is built. Chapter 5. The Manipulation Advantage. Here's what nobody tells Windows refugees about why Linux is actually worth the discomfort. Windows is designed to be used the way Microsoft wants you to use it. You can change the wallpaper, you can pin things to the taskbar, but the fundamental structure of how Windows works, what runs its startup, what data it collects, what it installs automatically, what it puts in your start menu, Microsoft controls all of that. You are a user of their platform, not an owner of your machine.
Linux is the opposite. Every piece of Linux is configurable. The desktop environment, swap it out entirely. What runs at startup, you control it completely. The visual appearance of the operating system, change every pixel if you want. The kernel itself, compile your own if you have the patience and the weekend to burn. This is not just a philosophical advantage, it is a practical one. When your Windows machine slows down, your options are limited. Run a cleanup tool, Disable some startup programs within the list Windows allows you to see. Hope the next update does not make it worse. When your Linux machine slows down, you can strip it down to exactly what you use and nothing else. No telemetry, no background processes serving Microsoft's advertising platform, no mandatory updates installing at the worst possible time. Just your hardware, running your software, doing your work. Once you're comfortable in Linux, and you will get comfortable, you will realize how much of what Windows calls features are actually just constraints dressed up as convenience. The manipulation goes both ways. Microsoft manipulates the interface to keep you dependent. Linux gives you the controls and trusts you to use them. The learning curve is real. 2 weeks of disorientation is real, but on the other side of those 2 weeks is an operating system that works for you instead of one that works you. Windows 11 is a polished turd. You already know this. That is why you are still watching. That is the real Linux migration guide. What actually breaks and why the community makes it harder than it needs to be, which distro actually works for where you are right now, and why the discomfort of 2 weeks is worth it. Linux meant for most people. Ubuntu if you want the biggest ecosystem. Pop! OS or Bazite if you have NVIDIA and care about gaming. Fedora if you want to go deep. Check linux-hardware.org before you install. Check proton-db.com before you game. Not aesthetics, not brand loyalty. Cold math on total cost of ownership, repairability, resale value, and which one is actually worth the money. You do not want to miss that one. Subscribe. Sudo bid logic is just getting started.